can edit.
Welcome to the noontime production of Counseling Home Companion. Now to our host.
Hi, I'm Caroline Bertolet.
Hi, I'm Kelly Olds.
And I'm Dr. Susan Thompson. Welcome.
Today we're going to focus on tips for clinical supervision.
We have a list of about 11 tips that we've collected from some experienced doctoral level student supervisors that we want to share with you today.
I'm so excited. Clinical supervision is one of my favorite topics. It's so important, as beginning counselor educators.
It very much so is.
So, the first tip we have for you is be flexible, because everyone has a lot on their plate. You are a student yourself, your supervisee is a student, so just be mindful of things may change sometimes. I'm sure you can think of times, Caroline, when things change for you and you had to be flexible.
Yeah, well, sometimes things don't always work out the way you want them to, so just being able to work with the student while maintaining the boundaries. So.
And speaking of things not working out, always have a backup plan. If you fail to plan, plan to fail. Always be over-prepared. Also, if you come to meetings prepared, but be willing to adapt to the needs of your supervisee, because sometimes they may not be where you are, so be willing to adapt. Right, Dr. T?
Absolutely. Everybody's different, so we got to make sure that we're making some adaptations to each person.
Yeah.
Number 2, be yourself. It's important when you're trying to establish a relationship with your supervisee that you're authentic, because that really helps build rapport. Also, you want to spend time building that rapport with your supervisee. The better relationship you have, the more comfortable you'll be, the more confident you'll be, and the less likely, or the more likely you are to be able to provide feedback in a more conducive way. Also, don't be afraid to make mistakes like I just did. They happen. Nobody's perfect. So just roll with it and keep going if you do.
Well, so in addition to being yourself, our tip number 3 is let supervisees be responsible. So as much as we're responsible for overseeing the work of our supervisees, we also need to allow our supervisees to be responsible. And that would start with early communication about scheduling for the semester. And what we recommend, and what folks that we talked to recommended, would be to provide 2 or 3 different times that you can meet, so that they can choose from those times. And then turn that responsibility over for paperwork, so they don't count on it coming from you. There might be some changes in how paperwork operates from one semester to another, but if you can get the supervisee to be as responsible as possible, that's going to be helpful for your process. And then it's also important for you to schedule time to talk about paperwork. The first supervision meeting, you'll make time for talking about whatever agreements, what supervision is. And in our program, you'll want to make time mid-semester and also at the end of the semester to talk about paperwork. And there might be other times that you carve out that time. Some people spend a few minutes at the very beginning of each supervision meeting talking about paperwork as well. And then make sure to work together to develop a schedule for when your supervisees bring in videos or paperwork, or and then here's that, you said, what was your quote? Plan if you don't?
If you fail to plan, plan to fail.
Okay, and that has to do with attending supervision meetings too. So make sure that you plan ahead for what happens if a supervisee or you can't make a supervision meeting. What's your fallback?
Right. Yes. And it's important also to make sure you have a crisis plan in place. Let your supervisee know that, when something happens at the site, make sure they keep you as a supervisor in the loop. Also, you want to address potential gatekeeping issues initially. Little things like arriving to supervision meetings on time, dressing professionally. It's important to make sure that you address these issues early on so it won't become a problem later. And also, document. I can't say it enough. Back to what Dr. T was saying, you have to make sure you document and keep paperwork up to date. Also, You don't have to act like the expert. We're not perfect. Be sure to consult with your own peers and your supervisors on a regular basis. That way you're making sure that you're staying current, on things as well. Also, consult with someone who doesn't agree with you. It's good to have that devil's advocate sometimes. It's good to have someone who doesn't always see it your way so you can see it from multiple perspectives. Also, it's important to copy your supervisor on all correspondence. I'm talking about emails, text messages. Always let your supervisor know what's going on so they can be aware of what's going on. So when something happens, they'll already know about the communication piece. Lastly, you don't have to pretend, again, you don't have to pretend that you know everything. Here's the tip. Consult, consult, consult.
Thank you.
Along with consulting, you always want to record your sessions. You never know when something could go wrong. Hopefully you always have perfect supervisees and nothing ever goes wrong, but sometimes things do happen, and so you want to have that video evidence to back you up. Also, you want to be willing to share your recordings with your supervisors. This is very much a parallel process, and just like the only way counselors grow is by watching themselves and learning, same with you in supervision. So you want to be sure you share those with your supervisors, and when you do, you don't always need to show them what's best and what makes you look good, right? Because you really want some of that constructive feedback so you can be a better supervisor.
Carolyn, I was thinking when you said record your videos, it's also good to have those videos. Just sometimes you may forget, what you guys were working on. So it's always good to be able to go back and kind of index that.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that idea. Our sixth tip has to do with setting goals and modeling goal setting. And probably should also note here that so much of supervision has a parallel process to what happens in counseling. And whatever happens in supervision, count on it trickling back to your supervisee's counseling sessions. So it's important that you're aware of how much you're modeling. And that starts with setting goals. From the very first time that you're working with your supervisees, setting goals for what they want to get out of supervision, and then being really clear about how you go about setting goals. You may be aware of the setting SMART goals, SMART being specific, measurable, attainable, reachable, and time-oriented. And it's a good idea for you to spend a few minutes talking about even the process of setting goals with your supervisees, teaching them how to do it so that they can pass that on to their clients as well. Schedule time to check in, as I said, with paperwork before. Keep in mind that supervisees' development is different. Each person is different, and their developmental level may determine how you set goals and how you review their progress as well. And then make sure to set goals for yourself. Acknowledging your own areas of strength and your own areas of growth and development, and making sure that when you consult, you're checking in with your supervisor about your own goals for your professional and personal development.
So, Dr. T's goal about taking care of yourself brings me to my next goal, which is self-care. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself and your needs. You can't be good for anyone else if you're not taking care of yourself. So, know your limits, know your knowledge, your experience, and your strengths. Also, you have to model self-care. You have to show our supervisees that that we're taking care of ourselves, and that will encourage them to do the same. You have to make sure that you're willing to talk about how to take care of yourself. Sometimes people don't realize you have to stop. Sometimes when you come into a room and just take a deep breath, that's part of self-care. Little things.
Next would be recognize that you will have dual roles and multiple roles. Many of your supervisees might be fellow classmates, or you might work on some research projects with them, or maybe you volunteer with them for something else, or have gone to conferences with them. So there is a big possibility that you will have these dual relationships with your supervisee, and recognizing that and being willing to talk about it with the supervisee, and discuss the boundaries and the roles that each of you might play. And also remember that you do have the power in the relationship. And so you're going to be modeling and shaping the future of these counselors. And so, but also learning to balance that as well. So
That's important, to balance.
So our 9th tip is being aware of your own motivations and potential distractions in your supervision process and just in general in life. Life throws us curveballs, and sometimes we're not able to be completely present, but that's the first step. So whatever tools you have to make sure to contain or leave at the door whatever's going on for you so that you can be fully present to your supervisees is going to be really helpful to them. And that's also modeling being fully present to clients in their case. So that means that as much as you need to take care of yourself, you also need to make sure that you're taking care of your own issues, your own motivations, and being aware of the dynamics that are happening between you and your supervisees, and any kind of patterns that seem to be developing as well, especially if it isn't going like other supervision relationships have gone. Counseling is about relationship, supervision's about relationship, and just know that your relationship with your supervisees will develop personally. And you're going to shape, the relationship is going to shape what and you talk about and how you talk about it. So the more you're aware of where you're coming from, the clearer you will be as a supervisor as well.
That's a good point.
Counseling skills. This may sound silly, but you don't want to forget to use them. Like Dr. T has been talking about, as supervisors, we are modeling to the supervisees. So use the skills in supervision so that the supervisees can see them and see how they're done effectively. Use immediacy, use reflection of affect, paraphrasing, summarizing, noticing discrepancies. All those things you've learned a long time ago, use them. Plus it helps with effective way of communication. Don't be scared to discuss countertransference. It's not always a bad thing. Sometimes countertransference can be used in a positive way, and sometimes it can be negative. Be willing to discuss that with them, because that will also model to them so they might be able to discuss it with their own clients.
And countertransference is such a natural occurrence at sometimes. So
Yeah.
that's important too, right?
It's just
normal.
a part of the counseling process, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of new counselors think it's something that shouldn't happen, but it just does.
Yeah, it's
Transference
bad.
'Happens,
'Cause we're human.
and
Yeah.
we're human, and any countertransference and transference is information.
Yeah.
So to treat it as information so that you look at the dynamics and whatever might be going on within the session as well is helpful for people to know.
Exactly. Also, make sure you kind of support and challenge them with their theory and their practice. Many new counselors might think they're doing a theoretical approach and might be way off. They might feel like they're stuck somewhere, and so they might be needed to be reminded to go back to their theory to kind of help them get through it. But be aware of what their theory is and support them on it, even if it's different than your own theory. And remember, when you're supervising the supervisee, it's not about the client. It's about the supervisee. So when you're talking with them and you're watching video, you're not focusing on the client and their issues. You're mainly focusing on the supervisee and what they're doing in the process.
That's a trick for new supervisors
It
to really
is.
learn.
It's
It's a
difficult.
tough transition, I
Challenging.
think, to make.
It's definitely probably one of the hardest parts of making the transition from counselor to supervisor. So, and just like with counseling in supervision, you want to look at the process. Instead of always focusing on the content, look at the process of what's going on. And then when you give your supervisees feedback, Remember that you're still modeling for them, so you want to make sure it's constructive, concise, and specific, and useful. So.
I want to add something to that, focusing on process. One of the things that I found myself saying in this last semester was people before paper. So if a supervisee brings in something that is really upsetting or something that's burning for them to talk about that. Paperwork is important, and sometimes it can wait, or maybe it doesn't need as much time as the process itself. So making sure that you're aware of where your supervisee is when they walk in the door as well. Our last tip is be a multicultural supervisor. So often when we approach supervision, we're not always aware of our own cultural influences and biases. And just like we talked before about modeling, it's important for us to model how to talk about multicultural issues in supervision. Again, so that your supervisee knows how to do it with their clients. So we're the ones who are in charge of the relationship of supervision, just like the counselor's in charge of the relationship with their client. And it's up to us to start talking or broaching multicultural issues. And that means that we have to be aware of our own values, any bias that we might have, or that we definitely have, the intentional or the unintentional ones. That has to do with the self-awareness aspect, that has to do with, this cuts across lots of different tips as well. And it means that in supervision, in addition to exploring your own values, to help your supervisees to explore theirs. So when something comes up, it's not just if, it's when.
Yes.
When something comes up, you've created a good relationship, a safe place for exploration of multicultural concerns as well.
Right.
Because they impact the counseling process. They impact the supervision process as much as they impact the counseling process. So those are our 11 tips, plus a lot extra.
Yes. But speaking of extra, don't be afraid to go out and, learn and research about your supervisee's culture, because there are some things that you may not be aware of that may be offensive to the supervisee or that to the client. So don't be afraid to do that. We want to thank you so much for listening, for taking the time to share with us. We share supervision tips with you. We hope that you can take something away from here today, and that we wish you the best as you embark upon your clinical supervision.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining for the Clinical Supervision Counseling Home Companion.